Just don't.
Just in your bank account.
Okay, we've ruined the entire
only
intro.
enough to survive.
Welcome to another episode of the Postmodern Polymaths, where nobody has etiquette or anything. This is episode 110 of the aforementioned podcast. I'm Chris. Next to me is Lyman.
Hi.
And next to him is a certain gentleman. He's been on the show before. And I think this week we're going to talk a little more politics. Go figure, and his bullshit, commie bullshit. So,
yeah, well, I'll give you as much of my commie bullshit as you can take.
Oh, I know that already. I've seen you.
That's not communism. That's sharing.
Oh, she does lots of sharing.
What the fuck do you think communism is?
That's my point.
All right. So briefly, thanks for coming on instantly, Kevin. And if you don't remember, Kevin was on the one where we were talking about different political philosophies. And I was trying to get an overview about some of them. This one's going to be more of a specific deep dive, especially in the one that he's one branch, I guess you could say, that he's kind of into or whatever.
But yeah, so... Oh, yeah, you wanted to start out with other stuff, didn't you?
Yeah, no, calm down. Pull it back. Anyway, yeah. Yeah, I broke my fucking arm, y'all. We hadn't been here 2 weeks because I broke my fucking arm. And it's not even in a cool way.
I told you to stop climbing the giant sex doll, man.
That would see, nobody does. Everybody, it's not like I was playing sports or doing extreme shit.
You have cats. That's extreme.
Well, that's neither here nor there. I was trying to put up a painting, which I'm not going to put up now. I'll probably have it up next week. But I have this picture I got where it's a cat looking from a beer. The guy's passed out, and it's from like the Depression era or something. And it's all cute and funny or whatever. But I went ahead and ordered it. The frame, I got the poster, I put it in there, and I was wandering. I don't remember. I was trying to move the picture from one place to the other. I slipped on cat litter. I came down like a goddamn redwood. There's a fucking big ass dent in my wall. You can't see it.
Bigger they are, harder they fall. You know.
There's a hole in where my head hit. Big indentation. So there was a flash of light, and as soon as I hit, I'm like, okay, something's broken. I already knew. I was like, nope, that's not good. So I was trying to talk myself. I'm like, maybe my shoulder's just dislocated or something. No, it's dislocated, all right, from its goddamn, from its fucking socket.
From its pieces.
So I had to go. I got my mom to take me to the emergency room. That motherfucker hurts. They gave me morphine. That shit didn't cut it. They even gave me Dilaudid.
Damn.
They gave me Dilaudid, and even that wasn't really cutting it that much. So, I mean, what could they do? All they did, I had to wait till Friday to go to a orthopedic surgeon to get looked at. And then I had surgery. What is today? Last Tuesday, I guess. I got surgery.
A week ago.
Yeah. I got surgery to get pins and shit inserted in there, but it hasn't been fun. I'm not fond of pain as a general rule. No kink shaming. If you're into broken arms and pain, yay.
I mean,
more power
here
to
I
you.
thought you were just a big old masochist, so you learn something new every day.
No, I'm well, no, that's toxic. But I'm pretty sensitive. I don't like that kind of shit. So when I've never broken my arm, and I've been all fucked up and depressed and shit for the last 2 weeks, and I've been out of my head. So, needless to say, I've been doped up. They gave me some Percocet and shit that I've been popping. So, anyway, that's why I haven't been in the last couple of weeks. Lyman tried to duck out tonight because he said some shit about him being sick.
Yeah, my kid over the weekend spread his space disease that he's been battling for a week.
And my thing is, if he gets sick so much, get him like a fucking face mask. What are you even doing?
A bubble?
You need something. You need like just to wear one of those.
Like the surgical masks. Like
Yeah, wear a surgical mask.
Kids are gross. You're never going to be able to get away from all the germs that are around
Well,
them.
that's what I'm saying. That's why I'm like, if I do hang out with y'all, you need to supply me with like a box of those surgical masks.
Surgical masks, rubber gloves, and hand sanitizer.
Hand sanitizer. That's a good call.
You can just rub it on the inside of the mask. So you just breathe it, and
The beard's a problem.
Yeah.
Yep.
That beard collects a lot of shit.
Nah, man, you get like the ones that they make you wear if you work in food. That like covers all that.
You get yourself a hair cap that goes around the beard, and then put the face mask on over your actual mouth and nose. You're fine.
I will design
totally
you a very
okay.
couture face mask for your beard.
Couture,
Yeah.
Very specific. So anyway, that's what happened to me. Sorry I've been gone. I will mention right quick that I may or may not have to pay some ridiculous amount for the ER visit because this particular, and I don't know how this is a thing, hospital is out of network for this insurance. I don't know how a hospital, ER, can be out of network.
Okay, as someone who literally works in the health insurance industry, I can go into all that, but essentially your health insurance and the hospital don't have a contract that says, oh, hey, we're going to pay less.
I know.
So that's essentially all it is.
Well, I posted about it, and I've already had 3 or 4 people who work in. I know one that's actually who does underwriting, and we're going to see if we can. Now this is just on the EOB. This isn't the actual bill, so I don't know exactly what's going to pop up on the actual bill yet because I haven't gotten one from Southern Hills, which is the hospital. But on the original EOB, it's saying like my fucking part was $3,800 or some bullshit. I'm like, you've lost your. I'm like,
that sounds like a bargain.
That sounds like bullshit. Is what
compared to
like.
Well, it is. No, it's objective bullshit, but.
So, I'll just have to cross my fingers, and I got friends see if they can help me out. I don't know. But anyway, that's all to say that this, of course, we already know that this insurance shit in this country is bullshit.
Medicare for fucking all, baby.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, on to that point. First of all, before we get into that, also we have to mention, just real quick, that the Orange Overlord has been acquitted of all. Let's keep in mind, acquitted doesn't mean innocent. Just as a quick aside of the 2 articles of impeachment.
No, it just means 52 senators were spineless fucks who don't understand how morality works.
Well, they're senators. I don't really think. I don't think that's a surprise. But I am.
when the high bar, when the praise of the group goes to Mitt Romney for voting to convict for one, the bar is basically like you could just like do a somersault over that bar.
Yeah. I cannot believe how many liberals I saw on Facebook just throwing a fucking party because Mitt Romney said he was going to vote to convict. And I'm just like, are you people fucking nuts?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Yes.
I'll give him like this much credit because
it was the bare goddamn minimum that anyone with ethics could do. Yeah, okay? He does not deserve cookies for that bullshit.
He deserves a sip of milk. That's about it.
Compared to, today's, atmosphere, I mean,
he can have one gummy bear as a treat.
Okay, one. Okay, it better not be one of the good ones either. He don't get a.
No, we'll make it licorice flavored.
Or like 2 weeks old, found under your seat in the car.
Oh God!
There you go.
That's another.
That's
another child moment.
Beans.
But I did just think I just thought it was an interesting. As an historical matter, of course, there's only been 3 impeachments.
You want to know what's funny?
No,
is that
wait, let me finish.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I had a point to make, Lyman, sir. He's the only one that's ever voted against impeaching somebody of his own party.
That's true.
For convicting. That's a historical matter. Okay, go ahead.
Well, on the historical topic, the history books are gonna put him as the hero of the like the way it's gonna be written is they're gonna be like nobody would vote against him, but they're gonna be like, but Mitt, and they're gonna sing his praises, and so
it depends who writes it. His story.
Yeah.
So it depends.
Well, yeah. If you go to school in Utah, you're gonna learn about the.
Oh well, yeah.
Oh yeah, no, you're gonna learn about fucking Saint Mitt Romney over there.
He'll get away with it because it's Utah.
He'll be the next prophet of the goddamn Mormon church.
Yeah.
Jesus, that wouldn't surprise me, actually. So, yeah, y'all, he's been acquitted. We already knew it was going to happen. The only bump was the Mitt thing. Sure, there's a centrist Republican left. Whoop-de-fucking-do. Who gives a shit? Okay.
So you mean they're a Democrat?
Yeah, exactly.
There's a slightly less right of center Republican left. One.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he's trying to make. This is what he does. He's got to make shit that's not difficult to explain, overly difficult. And this is why we have Kevin on.
I'm sorry if you can't handle nuance.
Oh, well, here we go, fucker.
Shots fired.
So let's go ahead and dive
my
right
rifle's
in.
loaded up and ready to go.
I know that's what premature ejaculator. Anyway,
I'm a master debater over here.
Okay, all right, let's take it down now, everybody. Okay. So, Kevin, let's start off first of all. Why don't you tell us who you are? You've been on here before, and just kind of give a brick, whatever you want to say on that. Intro.
I mean, I'm just your random everyday anarcho-communist. No one important, but that's kind of the way I like it. I believe in abolishing hierarchy, getting rid of the state, yeeting capitalism right out of there.
Yeet.
Yeet. Yeah,
You don't get anywhere. You don't get to do anything with yeet, sir. You're out.
Okay, fair enough. I'm way too white for that. But unironically support ending capitalism, abolishing the state, going to a more communal way of living, not like agrarian or, turning back technology, but just going to a more decentralized way of living. We've got all of these gigantic nations and these massive power structures and, a small group of people essentially getting to make decisions for the rest of the 7 billion people on the planet. And I think that's kind of bullshit. And I'd rather see people making those decisions for themselves and, going the way they want to go and not having to take orders from on high, as it were. Because, as much as we love to crow about freedom and democracy here in the U.S., especially, we are so far from either of those things that it's absolutely ridiculous that anyone thinks that we are either.
What? I was told there was freedom, sir. I was told there was freedom. I was told there was eagles flying and freedom.
We're sold a bill of goods.
God damn it.
Yeah. Hell, even the fucking Cato Institute knows we are not the freest country in the world, but...
And they're garbage.
What?
And they're garbage.
And they are absolute trash. But, broken clock, all that shit.
Yeah.
Mitt Romney.
Yeah, so, there's a million different things I could probably go into, and, a lot of these are just my ideas about how things should be organized and, made as fair as possible. Everyone's going to have their own different ideas. That's one of the kind of points of anarchism, is that no one inflicts their particular ideology on anyone else. The whole point is to come to consensus and actually fucking talk to people and figure out what they want, and you tell them what you want, and you figure out some way to make as much of that happen as possible. And a lot of it's got to do with convincing other people to your way of thinking, the way rational people make choices and decisions for a group.
Just kill them all.
One of the things that I hear people conflate is when they, first of all, and I'm sure you've seen this a million times, when they hear the word anarcho or anarchy, they think it's just like a fucking free for all. Everybody survival of the fittest, get your guns.
Yeah, so a lot of people conflate anarchy with chaos or rank individualism. And while there are a very small subset of anarchists who might honestly advocate for that. That's not the majority. Anarchy is really just, as it comes from the Greek roots, anarchy. Archy meaning, rulers, laws, rules, government, that sort of thing.
Like monarchy, patriarchy.
Yeah, monarchy,
Yeah.
oligarchy. So, anything with that archy end is really just a way of describing who's in charge. And anarchists basically say no one. We've got all of these, you hear all of these arguments about, should it be a representative or direct democracy, or a monarchist or a dictator, and all these things. And anarchists are over here just saying, how about none? Did you ever think about none? And of course, there's lots of people who are going to have a million different arguments against having none, largely because they're so ingrained and socialized into a system where, someone's always ruling over you in some form or another, that they have a hard time imagining how things would work when there's no one, no one person or no small group that's calling the shots for everyone else. And, it's one of those things where it's kind of lazy thinking. And I think that a lot of it, it's ironic that I call it that, because a lot of people use the inherent human laziness argument against anarchy, which I think is flawed in a number of ways, primarily in that the reason most people are apathetic towards politics and society in general is because they don't feel included. They don't feel like their voice is heard, and they don't feel like they can have impact. And one of the big things of anarchy is everyone has impact. Everyone has a voice. Everyone gets heard. And, it's one of those things that, it's a little bit hard to kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of hard to envision, how something like that's going to work. And there are a lot of kind of subsets of anarchist thought, different ways people think that, a stateless society can ultimately function. So you're going to find a lot of anarcho blanks out there. Communist is really just kind of an umbrella catch-all term.
Oh, it's a catch-all. Because I just wanted to kind of, because I want to try to start at the macro, and if we have time, we just because otherwise it'll just be everywhere. So anarcho, we've already established, means no central government, basically no rulers.
Yeah.
And communism, obviously, no, not obviously, because there seems to be, that's another thing.
Yeah, well...
I'm sorry, I meant obvious to people who know what the fuck they're talking about.
Yeah, so communism, and I'm going to use communism and socialism largely interchangeably here. You'll find a lot of people who disagree with that and want to get into the weeds on, the particular definitions of each word, but their meanings have been so distorted from when they originally came about that they largely are interchangeable now. And I'm going to have plenty of people disagree with me on that, but that's my particular take on it. It's essentially, the idea is the labor you do belongs to you. It's, the idea of selling your labor to someone else just so you can put food on the table when there's abundant food all around us, much of it going wasted and uneaten every day. That's a completely absurd situation in our view. Excuse me. So, we just want there to be a society in which basic needs get met, and, the things people need are freely available to them. And a lot of people have issues with this because they're so stuck in the mindset of, a monetary market economy, and because that's what we live in every day. And so, you get a lot of straw man arguments like, who's going to grow the food? I'm like, well, people are going to need to grow food in order for there to be food. So that's something that in an anarchist communist society, people just figure out to do. And how they do that specifically can vary in a lot of ways. But one example is, you have a community of, say, 100,000 people, roughly the size of, a small to mid-sized city. And, you can even go smaller than that, neighborhood by neighborhood, what have you. But the people can get together and say, hey, we need food so that everyone gets fed. How best do we go about doing that? And people put in their suggestions, and they talk and figure it out and come to a consensus on who does what in terms of, getting the food grown or whatever the particular need is. And then there's also the possibility of federating with, joining in into a mutual aid situation with another nearby community. So maybe they grow the food and we build something else, and and we make those resources freely available to the other one. And so it's one of those things where there's a lot of specifics and kind of weeds that you can get into, but the core idea of it is that someone having to sell their labor just to survive, and often,
Maybe.
even that, often that's a big ass maybe, is just complete and utter nonsense in the world we live in. And there's no reason for it to continue that way, except that a bunch of people have gotten, have managed to hoard a ton of resources, and, are ardently defending that from the people who are essentially being taken from. And so they find ways to convince us and propagandize us and do all this shit to keep us convinced that, capitalism's the only one that works. And I'm like, no, there are examples all around the world. And I'm not talking about like the USSR and Cuba and all that shit, but I'm talking about actual socialist communities that have worked.
I wanted to stop you there because I got a couple.
I do get rambly. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. But there's somebody asking. A friend of mine is asking some questions in the comments.
Oh, sure.
Let's see. How do you settle disputes in anarchy? I think that goes kind of along with what you were saying as far as bartering. Wouldn't that be a settled dispute? A settlement dispute would be some sort of arbitration court or something like that.
So I'd want a more specific example of the type of dispute being taken here, but one of the fundamental things about both anarchism and communism is the idea of private property. And so this one's a little bit jargony, so I'm going to try and make it as simple as possible. So there are, in our view, essentially two types of property. There's personal property, which is just the stuff you have and use. It's my phone or this pillow or my
whatever.
Yeah, exactly, your toothbrush. And then there's private property, and that's a little bit more of a complex concept. So the idea is essentially property that you can have someone else work to provide you profit. And to explain that a little further, let's say you own a bit of land and you decide to build a factory on that land, and then you put all of the equipment in there, and then you pay people to run the equipment, and then you essentially get to keep all of the stuff that factory makes and do with it as you please. Sell it, bury it, whatever you happen to want. And what we're saying is that, sure, maybe you put in the money to make, to get the building built and buy all the equipment, but without the people, none of it does anything for you. So it's really the labor of the people that actually creates the majority of the value of whatever it is that you ostensibly own. And what we're saying is, just we want to get rid of the idea of private property to where everything is owned by everyone. And that in itself is going to be considered a pretty radical stance for most of life. The idea that no one really owns any land, any building, what have you. There's a common concept that you'll find kind of in this rough sphere, which is called usufruct. Comes from a smattering of a couple, I think, Latin words. Essentially, it's the concept of ownership by use, and that you may use what you have to benefit yourself or others, but you may not abuse it, and you may not hoard it. And when I say hoard it, I mean keeping ownership of something that you're not actively using. A great example of this is the idea of landlords. So my landlord owns the house that I live in, and I pay them a certain amount that we've agreed upon, but they don't use it. This is just some piece of property, some building and land they don't use. They just rent it out. And that doesn't make any sense from any sort of liberty perspective, because you're essentially saying, oh, hey, I own this and you can only use it when you pay me a certain amount, and otherwise it just goes unused. And I'm like, well, we have people who are fucking homeless and living on the streets. Why the fuck do you get to just own an empty building when there are people who need shelter? How does that make sense? So essentially, landlordism is one kind of microcosm of this whole concept of private property. But it's basically saying, or the ideas of communism are basically saying, if you use it, it's yours. Once you're done with it, let it go to someone else, because there's no point in hoarding that which you have no use for.
So
it's just.
I'll use your example. So let's say somebody has a piece, they have property that they're not using, or they're not using, but we'll just say squatting in to appear to use it. Because, at some point, that some human is going to be greedy, maybe want to take more than they have. How do you what method, or for lack of a better term, system or way do you deal with the people that engage in the behavior that is antithetical to the concept if you don't have a government?
Yeah. Well, one thing I will clear up. Anarchy is not necessarily no government. There's a distinction between the government and the state, which I can go into. But for the moment, we're going to assume that there is a fairly limited system of government in whatever anarchist society we might be hypothesizing. And let's say, like you said, someone's hoarding resources that's needed by others, and they aren't actively using it. It's not something that they need in the moment. It's just something they're keeping for whatever reason, greed, what have you. The first step in something like that, and this'll depend community by community how they specifically want to deal with this, but I'm just going to go ahead and give kind of an idealized version, which is that essentially, once the community at large has determined through whatever their method is that, this person is taking more than they need and they're hoarding resources that are needed by the community, it's kind of a situation of, okay, we need to go take it back. And that is going to be scoffed at by many as, being unnecessarily violent or, taking what isn't yours. But I would argue that if you go back to the fact that they took something that they didn't need, that was taking it from everyone else. And that was the original theft. So by taking back what is needed by the rest of the community and is not in use, is not actively needed by the person who has it, that is a just system of resolving that particular dispute. And the idea is not that you would immediately go to violence or taking it back by force, and you would hope that you can reason with the person and be like, so you don't need this, let's go ahead and put it somewhere where everyone can get it. But in the event someone is intent on keeping whatever it is that they don't need and they're not using, then the fact that they took it in the first place with no intent to actually make use of it and do something with it, that's kind of the original theft in our view.
Do you think that at a certain point at scale it becomes less feasible? Like, you could do it with 5 people, you could do it with 500 people, but when you start talking about, like, say 7 billion people,
the scale argument is pretty common, and I rebut that with scale is what you make it. And by that I mean you can make a community of any size, and you can come up with the specific rules, guidelines, whatever of that community as a collective. So if you want to say our group is these 20 people, and we've all agreed to help one another and support one another and make decisions that are best for this group, and then you find out, well, we don't have everything we need to survive, so we need other stuff. Well, hey, there's this group over here that has the stuff. Maybe we can talk to them and enter into some sort of mutual aid pact where, things we have, we give freely to them, things they have and we need, it goes, both ways. And so you get enough of these small communities together and you start to build bigger and bigger, what we call federations, but I mean, you can call them anything you want, networks, I can't think of another word than network at the moment. But just essentially communities of communities, and building that up, and creating or going into a sort of system of. Sorry, words are failing me at the moment.
What?
Going into a system of collective agreement and agreement that what is best for the community or the overall collection of communities is what they're striving for, with the underlying principle being bottom up power will always be the way that it goes. So say you have 10 communities and they all need to get together and, make a decision about something. Well, each one could send a representative or a set of representatives to simply represent the will of that community. And, these representatives can be revoked at any time or recalled, so long as they are representing the interests of the community from which they come and working in good faith to negotiate with the other communities that they're working with to find the best solution for all. That's the kind of federating, networking, mutual aid that we would be looking for in a society of this sort. And one example of this has actually been existing for coming up on 30 years. There's a group of people in the southernmost state of Mexico, Chiapas, who call themselves the Zapatistas. They tend to eschew political labels, but for the most part, they are probably the closest thing we have to this sort of society. And essentially this is what they do. They have people, they have it's essentially an autonomous collective of different communities who all decided that we're going to work together and support one another and make the best life that we can out of the resources around us. They're not perfect. No human society, I don't think, ever will be. But perfection is not the goal I think we should be striving toward. It's to make the world as fair as we possibly can. And there's a long way we can still go in making that happen. So I think that these ideals that I'm talking about, and mind you, I am by no means a speaker for an entire community of incredibly diverse opinions, and not all of my thoughts and ideas are going to be as fully fleshed out as others now and in the past have made them. So I definitely recommend, if these ideas interest you, I'm happy to offer resources that of things you can look up that I'm sure Chris here can put in the show notes whenever this finally airs, that people can take a look at.
What do you think about those companies? I can't think of their names at the moment, that where basically it's almost a democratic process for running the companies where...
Yeah, so that's a concept known as the worker-owned co-op. And the idea is that essentially all the workers of the company collectively own the company, and they democratically make the decision about, the high-level operations of the company, how things are made and sold, and what's done with the profits and all of that. And within the framework of a capitalist society, that's probably the closest thing you're going to get to, true worker control of their own labor. And so, it's something I heavily support, in that I think establishing those and getting more of them up and running, because they've shown they can definitely be successful in this hyper capitalist world. So moving more and more companies to that model is going to give a really good kind of foundational system for transitioning into a more democratic society overall.
Here's a question, sir. Now, I was made fun of saying this before because I'm a very vengeful person, and I remember things when I'm hurt, Kevin. I'm hurt. When we brought up the issue of human nature, and the argument of human nature, we could never do this because human nature wouldn't allow such a thing. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's me, asshole. Okay. So, and the only reason I brought that up, and it wasn't even in the context of necessarily just this particular system, but you could say the same thing about libertarianism, because they also base it on personal responsibility or whatever. So I'm wondering, is that not at all? There has to be some, because we see it happen all the time, right? We see how fucked up shit people can do, right? So
one of the things I would argue is that human nature is a lot more flexible than I think a lot of people give it credit for. We have evolved through building societies. And that's kind of our main MO as a species is, we come together in groups, we work together, we make these incredible things, cities and, spacecraft and all this shit. And that's all done by working together. So I would say the core fundamental human nature is that of cooperation rather than competition. The fact that we see so much, behavior that we might call, bad or evil or just undesirable. I'm talking, greed, hoarding, people hurting other people just to get ahead. I would argue most, if not all of that, is a product of the particular society that we've built and not something that's inherent to humanity. So, let's take the Orangerton chief as an example here. He was brought up in an environment in which, he was taught that you have to get as much as you can for yourself, and everyone's trying to take it from you. And to be completely honest, that lesson wasn't necessarily wrong, because that's kind of how capitalism is designed to be, in as much as it could be said to be designed. So I think a fundamental shift in how society is structured will lead to a similar fundamental shift in overall human behavior. The idea being, if you have everything you need to live and have a fulfilling life, what use is greed? What use is hoarding? There may be some who still have those impulses and instincts, and that's kind of something you've got to take on a case-by-case basis. But I honestly think that the majority of the evil and the hurt we see in the world are spawned out of unmet need. So, let's take, a big city example. You've got all of these, all this various crime and violence in big cities. And if you actually look at what causes that and get really down into the deep causes of all of that, you tend to see that almost all of it is because there is some need that hasn't been met. Whether it's someone holding up a gas station because they need money for rent or to afford medicine or just food, to someone killing someone else over something that they both need, but there isn't enough to go around. And there's going to be many other examples of various types of violence and just overall bad human behavior. But I honestly do believe that any example you can give me, there will be a cause not too far away that had to do with some unmet need. And so a society that strives to meet the needs of all as much as is possible, and I think that in our current state of technology that it's pretty possible to meet all the basic needs of life, that people can actually start to unwind and unlearn the behaviors that they've had to learn just to survive. And, this may be a multi-generational thing, because the lessons we learn as, young children stick with us throughout our entire lives. We learn behaviors very early on. And so it may take a concerted, conscious effort to, try to unlearn those behaviors within ourselves, but even more so to prevent them being learned by future generations.
Yeah, I definitely think it would take a good amount of time to undo it.
I'm not suggesting this stuff can happen overnight. I don't think anyone honestly believes that. I think most people who hold these beliefs understand that it has to be a process. And it's a process that won't be instantaneous. A lot of people love to go on about the revolution, and while I think that's certainly a possibility to get some of the biggest structural changes, there has to be a lot of work done on the personal and interpersonal level for any sort of mass societal change to have a real lasting impact.
I think an easier concept for people to try to get on board with that is to learn more of a utilitarian view, where it's like the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people with the least amount of harm type concept. I think, because that's ultimately what it kind of, if you really distill it down, that's the idea.
Yeah, and I don't know. I wouldn't say that I stick to pure utilitarian philosophy, because it does have a number of downfalls and philosophical problems with it. But the base foundation that it provides gives us a really good underlying structure on top of which to build systems that do benefit everyone as much as possible. And, I'm a big Star Trek fan, and, one of the common lines from that in the alien culture called the Vulcans is the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. And I believe more along the lines of the needs of the many are the needs of the few or the one. What benefits the community benefits the individual, and vice versa.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
so, and so, we don't see that because that's not how we build our communities today. We build them as, a balance of competing interests. And
Fuck you,
I
me
think
first.
exactly. And so if everyone's going around saying fuck you me first, well, that does build something of a balance, but it's a very tenuous and unstable balance, and one in which the more ruthless you are, the higher you climb. And so, a society which encourages that sort of behavior is not one that's going to last very long. And, in the grand scheme of things, capitalism as we know it today has existed for a couple centuries, maybe 400 years at most. And, speaking on a chronological level, that's practically nothing. Human societies have existed for tens of thousands of years. 400 years is nothing. People have been doing shit way longer. And so it's one of those things where I think that eventually the system we're in is going to meet its collapse if we don't do something to fundamentally shift how people interact with one another. And that's all this really comes down to, is how people interact with one another, because the resources are all there. The planet is fucking gigantic. And, there's plenty to go around, especially with all the technology that we've built to, increase the amount of, stuff that
Everything.
we can get. Yeah, the amount of everything. And it's really about how we interact with one another and how we treat humanity as a whole, and how we interact with the environment around us. Because, I tend to be very human-centric in my arguments, but, what we do has a drastic effect not only on everyone else around us, but everything else. All the animals, all the plants, all the other life on this planet is hugely impacted by what we do, and has been for centuries. And so, you may have heard the term Anthropocene, basically the human-centered era, as it were. And it's basically saying that we have made such a magnificent impact on this world that millions of years later, people will probably still be able to find a good amount of evidence of our existence and the impact we had on the planet. So, I really think that learning how to treat one another with more fairness and empathy, and learning how to cooperate and to not take for granted all that is around us, in on this planet, and, eventually if we go beyond, to really understand that humans do have the capability to find that balance with each other, with the world, with the environment. And it's just a matter of making it happen, finding the will to get it done, or at least to start the process. And that, all I can say is that requires education. And that's kind of why I do this. I go on a podcast episode, I go on Twitter, go on Facebook, and make these arguments, because it can't be just a small amount of people saying, shit needs to change. It's about building community. And if that's the if that's the place we want to get to eventually, we've got to start now. And so, there have been lots of kerfuffles lately about, I'm just going to go with one fairly recent example. The podcast host Joe Rogan basically endorsed Bernie Sanders, or at least he said he would vote for him. And the Sanders campaign, tweeted that out saying, woohoo, we got this endorsement from this big name. And a lot of people are very angry about that because, this guy's kind of a piece of shit. But it's going to take actually working with people, even if we don't like their views, even if their views are in many ways harmful to us, to the marginalized people in the community. I'm not saying that we have to accept them as they are, but we do need to interact with them. We do need to try and change their minds about those things that are harmful. And the more we can do to win them over to this idea of building a more fair, cooperative world, the better off we're going to be, because at the end of the day, it's about how many people you have to start these communities and to make them actually work. And, it's going to take the work of convincing people and bringing them to our side. And that's ultimately what has to be done to get any traction on this at all.
Yeah, I think some people are going to end up being a lost cause. The more extreme, the Richard Spencers, the crazies out there, which I don't think they should be. I'm torn because I don't think that we should waste our time trying to convince them of anything, because they've jumped the shark as far as, it's like trying to convince, I don't know, a person that believes in aliens that there aren't no aliens, or they're set in their mind. They've set their mind on a certain way of thinking, and it is very harmful. But at the same time, like, you see people that will do something that it's wrong. They'll say something that, might be racist, might be offensive, like in certain contexts, like a comedian or something like that. And it's like, it kind of goes, if we ostracize all these people, like, they're not just going to disappear. Like, where do they go?
Yeah. So my view on this is that I don't truly believe that anyone is completely unreachable. I know that there are going to be a lot of people who are extremely resistant, and in the event that their current beliefs lead to behaviors which put people in danger, that danger should be prevented through whatever means necessary. But I also believe that no one is completely out of reach, or at least almost no one. There may be some small set who are so dug in that they can never be convinced out of it. But I've seen a lot of people through various means on the internet, being de-radicalized from those hard right-wing viewpoints into more centrist or even leftist viewpoints. And because of the kind of fundamental differences that the political spectrum has from side to side, they don't unlearn all of the harmful stuff right away. It takes years to really start to unravel all of the assumptions and beliefs that have been pounded into them through whatever method they were radicalized with. But I do believe that with time, and the most important factor in that equation is, to me, relationship. Arguing with someone online, probably not going to do much. I do it because, I don't have a lot of people in my personal life that don't already agree with me, and, getting these ideas into as many places as possible to reach as many people as possible is not a bad thing. But it's really going to take the work of someone, if you're trying to get someone out of those toxic mindsets, it's going to take the work of someone they know and trust and have built a relationship with to really make that happen, because that's the person who's going to reach them in the most profound way.
And that's like, and that's the only way to really, that's one way to like address the acute situation. But,
yeah,
you know, and I'm going to totally sound like an old man when I say this, but it's like the next generations, you know, our generation has kids, the next generation has kids. If I think progressively, especially with like, I have a 7-year-old, like he's not going to grow up with the same ideas that like our parents did in like the 50s or the 40s and things like that. And you can, for lack of a better term, breed these ideas out of society over time, which I think is going to be the big impactor, you know, because the idea of slavery right now, like 9.5 out of 10 people is like, whoa, like that's not okay. But if you went back 100 years, if you went back 100 years, it's a different situation, you know?
Yeah, and that is one of the big things is, you know, societies change over time. Ideas of what's acceptable change over time. And it, you know, each generation imparts a certain, you know, set of precepts and ideas upon the next. But those generations also tend to come up with a lot of ideas of their own. You know, we've seen, you know, such a drastic shift between the baby boomer generation, Gen X, and millennials. And, you know, each generation imparted some of their ideas upon the next, but then those generations came up with new ideas, better ideas. And that's kind of the path of history, or at least, you know, the most optimistic path of history. But I do think that the people who exist in the here and now can be reached. It's just going to involve a lot of work. And unfortunately, there are going to be people who cannot be reached before it becomes a problem. And by that, I mean, you know, before, you know, it goes from being the right-wing blogger online to someone like Dylan Roof going to shoot up a church in, where was that? I don't remember. South Carolina. Yeah. Okay. You know, there are going to be people who can't be reached in time because of circumstance. And I honestly grieve for the people who will be lost that way, because they're unnecessary, but I shouldn't say unnecessary. It's an unnecessary loss. Yeah, it's a preventable loss that turned into a critical situation. And I hope we find better ways to reach more people more quickly. But as long as, you know, the violence that, you know, comes against marginalized people exists, people are going to have to be there to fight back. And, you know, I can only hope that we can increase the level at which we can reach those people. And there are always going to be people to fight them when, you know, talking talking stops working and, you know, the shit hits the fan. So it's kind of, I'm an optimistic realist in that I want to believe that everyone can be reached and these ideas can, you know, get to the hearts and minds of enough people to start making changes. But I also understand that that's not always going to happen in the time frame we need before people start getting hurt. And so, you know, it's kind of, you've got to find that balancing act between, you know, talking and sharing ideas and trying to win people to your side and defending people who are in danger in the moment. So,
yeah. I mean, I think the one benefit we have is that the youngest generation, like the millennials and Gen Z and stuff like that, they're not going to grow up with the seemingly beneficial aspects of capitalism and things like that. Like, you know, if you were born in the 80s, like things were pretty good then. like overall, like as a whole for the average person. But obviously, as the decades went on, that quickly became much worse
Yeah.
than we could have
And
planned.
yeah, and I have lots of thoughts about, why things were so good, back 40, 50 years ago. And a lot of that has to do with kind of historical precedent. But to deal with the now and the immediate future, we're seeing that a lot of people are getting more and more hurt by the current situation. And, whatever the big indicators of economic prosperity might tell you, a lot of people are out there hurting and suffering.
Oh,
And
yeah.
sure, the big name items, murder and theft and all those things, they might be down, but that doesn't mean that more people are doing better. It means that the deterrence we've built, such as shooting unarmed black men in the street, have kept people in line, as it were. The police aren't a force for peace; they're a force for order. We're essentially
Two very different things.
Yeah, we're essentially being occupied in our own communities, and that's all modern policing has become. It's an occupation of violence
and things that are positive that you'll hear where it's like, oh, unemployment's down, and it's like, that's good on the surface, but how many people, like, that's usually based off of how many people are claiming some sort of benefit from the state. Like, does that go up and down? It doesn't account for the people that are no longer, or they're working 3 jobs, still can't pay for their shit, can't pay to live.
Yeah.
Like,
so
there's a lot of suffering that is not in those metrics. And then they'll be like, the Dow Jones is up. And it's like, that doesn't fucking matter to anybody.
Yeah, I can get very wonky on a lot of this stuff, because one of my firmly held beliefs is that in order to fight a system, you have to understand a system. So I listen to a lot of economics podcasts to get a better understanding of kind of the current state of the world and how it tends to be viewed by, the typical neoliberal average Joe. And so I can get a little wonky, and there are statistics to tell us all of these sorts of things. One that kind of gets in the weeds is the labor force participation rate, and it's essentially the percentage of adults between, I think it's 25 and 55, what's known as the prime age for working. That rate really tells you how many people are actually in the job market. That is to say, either are currently working or are looking for work. And that's actually been pretty stagnant since the Great Depression, if not earlier. Or not Great Depression, Great Recession, the 2008 thing. And that's been pretty stagnant. So yeah, the unemployment rate has gone down, but that only counts the number of people that are either currently working or looking for work. Doesn't include all the people who've stopped working for various reasons. And so, that doesn't really tell you much about how a lot of people are doing. And then there's another issue, which is, you'll hear about things like the inflation rate. Well, the inflation rate is really just the average inflation rate across, all market sectors, essentially. And there are a few sectors which matter a hell of a lot more than others. The housing market, for instance. I think one of the common Bernie Sanders campaign lines is, talking about the fact that someone making minimum wage can't afford a 2-bedroom apartment pretty much anywhere in America. And that used to be a thing that people could do.
Oh yeah.
You can have one person working minimum wage or slightly above, being able to provide for a family of 4, and you can barely provide for yourself at that.
I know people that work 2 full-time jobs that are at or around, and have a couple kids or something, and they it's still like one disaster, like moderate to small disaster, like a flat tire away from being completely crippled.
Yep.
And it's like all of these things that we're readily given statistically. Like if you turn on any news channel or anything like that, it doesn't measure, I guess, what I'll call prosperity. Like,
Yep.
great. You could have 100% employment rate, but if everybody is still working and can't pay their bills, like, what does that really mean?
Yeah. And, one good platitude that I think really applies here is statistics don't lie, but the people who present them sure as hell do. And, it's very easy to frame any statistic in almost any way you want. You can make the numbers say whatever the hell you want them to if you just frame them in the right way. And, I don't think any of us is immune from that bias. I'm sure, all the stats I've thrown out here, yeah, I'm probably cherry picking a bit of data, but I'm not trying to go into, the full analysis of every possible economic metric we have. I'm mostly trying to combat the ones that you hear the most often in the typical media, and showing, these numbers seem great, but what do they really mean when you get down to the level of the individual or the family?
It always blows my mind when I see people cheering on, like, oh, the stock market's up 1,200 points today, and most of the people cheering that will never have enough money to ever enter even into the stock market.
Yeah,
but they get all happy about it, and it's like, like, you could gain 1 billion points in the stock market, but that's not going to get you out of, like, the shitty neighborhood with the broken windows and the drug dealers on the street. It's not going to get the drug dealers off the street because they need money. Like, most crime and things like that is a result of desperation and people needing something. Mm-hmm. They don't want to do it, but they'd rather sling dope on a street corner than have their kid go hungry. And if you can start getting the fundamental basic pains of human existence out of the way, you could reduce a lot of that.
That's exactly what I've been saying. And one of the things about the stock market that I'll just quickly point out is, I don't remember if it was 40% own or don't own, but one of those two. Basically, there is a huge chunk of the population of the U.S. who don't own any stock.
It's a 42% participation rate.
Yeah, okay. So that means 58% of people don't own any stock. Now, I technically own stock through the fact that I have a 401k through my employer. But, I lose my job, I lose all of that, essentially. And,
if the market takes a giant dive.
Yeah, if the market takes a giant dive, then, my retirement essentially goes up in smoke. Not that I think I'll actually be able to retire even with that. That's looking 30, 40 years into the future. Who the fuck knows what's going to happen? But I would bet today that I will not see, more or less any of that money that I've been putting away. I put it away just in case, and because, having it now wouldn't add that much more to my life in particular. That's not going to be the situation for everyone. In fact, I would argue that's not the situation for the majority of people. I fully recognize that I am in a much more privileged position than most. But I also know that, shit like the stock market doesn't matter to the average person. It just doesn't. It might matter to them in their head, but it's not going to matter to them in any way that really matters. And, the Dow could hit 40,000 tomorrow. And sure, people are going to have a big parade and say, woohoo, but what does it actually mean to a person? If you don't have a ton of money tied up in stocks, it means nothing to you. And so I'd love to see people just stop talking about it. Obviously they're not going to. That's it's a huge point of propaganda and just the overall media attention sucking machine. But what we want to focus on is can people put food on the table? Can they, put a roof over their head? If they have a sick kid, can they take them to the hospital and not end up having to choose between their child's life or continuing to have a roof or food? People shouldn't have to make those decisions. And in the society we have today, where there's plenty of food and there's plenty of houses, and we have more than enough, medical knowledge and supplies and resources to make sure everyone can get the care they need for whatever it is. The fact that we make people choose between such basic necessities of life is asinine and heartbreaking at the same time.
Well, you should just learn to ration your insulin better.
Yeah, because, rationing insulin hasn't killed anyone. Oh,
no.
Wait.
Or you can go there's some over-the-counter version that you can get at like Walmart now that's killed a couple people too. It's like,
oh dear God.
Yeah, I don't fully know, but it's gross either way.
The worst thing about the insulin example, we literally genetically engineered yeast so that we could produce that shit in mass, and it's still like what, $400 a vial or some ridiculous shit like that.
It's officially the most expensive liquid on the planet.
Yeah, it's absolutely absurd, and we genetically engineered yeast to make this stuff. Okay, why is it so goddamn expensive when we have the technology to just be like, oh, we're going to put that gene in that little microbe over there and make it replicate 1 billion times, and then it'll pump out as much as we could possibly need? How the fuck does that happen? Greed. I mean, I know how it happens, but it's...
Well, they don't have to put a gun to your head. They just say, your money or die. Like, that's really what it boils down to.
That's one of the things I absolutely hate the most about the right-wing libertarian viewpoint of, it's all voluntary association. I'm like, no, it's fucking not. It's not voluntary when your choice is
an illusion.
It's not voluntary when your choice is, accept what I deign is, what I deign that you are worth, or die. So the market has decided that you're worth $6 an hour. Well, that's not enough to feed you. It's better than nothing. How is that a choice? It's not. That's coercion, plain and simple. And you can make that argument with them, and it won't go anywhere because it's voluntary. It's like, no, it's fucking not. It's not voluntary. If you are forced into that decision by the circumstances of life, it is anything but voluntary.
All right, gentlemen, we need to go ahead and wrap it up. Because we'd let Kevin go. He'd be talking for another 5 fucking hours straight.
I would. It's true.
So let's kind of wrap. I mean, overall, your best bet for you is anarcho-communism. Is that
that's my particular flavor of choice, as it were. I see, the basic concept of anarchy is, getting rid of unjustified hierarchies, justification here essentially being consent, and, that includes getting rid of the hierarchy of capital. Of, one person has more money than the other. Oh, well, then, they have power over that person, essentially. And I want to get rid of that and, find a way to build a system where everyone can get their needs met and actually, make life somewhat fulfilling.
What's that?
Fulfilling. Look up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I basically want to fill in the first two, or the bottom 2 levels of that, so people can actually work on the top shit.
You mean it's not about working until you literally can't move or function, and then being like, I'm going to get an RV, and then you'll die in debt.
I know that's what everyone thinks it is, but I think we can do better.
Yeah, we can. And by better, I mean worse.
Just learn to play pool real well.
See, I'd rather learn to build a large 18th century French mechanism for separating crania from torso.
I just want the TSA to leave me alone when I smuggle burritos to Maryland from Arizona. That's all I want.
Did you catch Kevin's little joke there?
Yes, I am pretty sure Lyman caught it.
Well, maybe it was me.
Eat the rich.
All right, y'all. Well,
Compost the rich. You don't want kudu.
Thanks for coming on once again and
Of course.
providing us with your insights.
Well, feel free to pull me back in to pick my brain. I'm free pretty much whenever.
I know. I see your ass on Twitter now all the time.
Oh, and if people want to follow you on the tweets, what's your tweet handle?
Yeah, go ahead and
plug yourself.
So on Twitter, I'm libsocscientist, LIBSOC scientist. On the Facebooks, my page is that SJW the Nazis warned you about. Yes, it's a long one. Those are the two places I do the most posting. Where I'm pretty much active. And honestly, I don't give a shit what you guys think about my the names of my accounts. I'm not a particularly creative person, so I just come out and say what I am.
So pretentious. Anyway.
Yes, I am a pretentious fuck.
Seriously though, always love having you on. I tell you one thing: if you got something you want to learn about and you know it, you'll learn it.
Well, I do my best.
It may take a while, If you like in-depth shit, deep diving.
Yeah, this shit gets so in depth. It's hard to cover in high-level conversations, but I do what I can.
In an hour.
Yeah. And somewhat. All right. Well, we're gonna go ahead and wrap it on up, but I'm gonna tell you, Kevin, send me the links to all your stuff on Facebook Messenger because it doesn't come up on here right for some reason.
Yeah, it's fine.
And Lyman, you got anything clever you want to say, or do you never have anything out now?
I am basically a waste of carbon.
Okay, I'm going to take that as yes. All right.
Man.
Well, until next time, y'all. Y'all take it easy now, okay?